Hello, advanced students. This is Dr. Mo, and we have the game TRON. Well, at least a partially completed TRON. Let me show you, before I explain the code, let me show you what this thing is going to make. So, you can't see it right now, but I'm actually not pressing the arrow keys except to turn this guy. So, he just keeps going in the direction you set him. Also, I have collision partially working, like right here. If you notice over on the console window, see how it said crash there? I only have that set up to go to work in the rightward direction. So you see it doesn't really do anything here, but as soon as I turn right, it does. So you're going to need to not only complete the collision physics here so it does something other than just say crash in the console window, but you'll also be needing to add a second player to this game as well. So think about that as I explain it, because I'm only giving you part of the code, but hopefully enough that you can actually get it working. So starting off here, there shouldn't really be a whole lot of new stuff here. We have just the basic Allegro setup. I'm drawing squares and things, so that's why I have primitives. You might want to add some more if you end up putting sound and graphics in this. We've got our constants and enumerations. Here inside main, we're going to set up a matrix. I have mine as a 50 by 50 grid. I named it grid. And the first thing I do is I go through and I use a nested for loop to set all of my grid squares to 0, except this is my lazy way of doing this. Notice laziness is a virtue. It took a little thinking to do this, but it definitely saved a lot of typing in the long run. If the row is the top row or the bottom row, or if the column is the first column or the last column, I'm setting it to 1. And when you go down in the render section, you'll see that anything that is a 1 is going to be drawn white. You can change that to any color you want, but that's to show that this game does have walls and you don't want to go past those walls. Collision at the moment I don't think is hitting that. Like you can just go through the wall and it won't do anything. So that's also something that you're going to want to mess with. This part right here is optional. That's just printing to the console for testing. So obviously when people play the game they're not going to want to see that. So you might want to comment that out later. But I think it's a good idea here just to make sure things look the way you want them to, especially if you're going to be modifying the size of your grid. Alright, so we've got some setup here of some variables. Nothing really should be new here, but let me point out the fact that your player has an XY starting position. He also has a velocity. These guys right here are your player's X velocity and Y velocity. And we're going to be messing with the velocity, not the actual, we're not going to be manipulating the position directly in the physics section. Alright, setting up Allegro, nothing new here. As long as you've gotten through Pong, this should be old stuff. So let's get to good stuff. Let's get to the game loop. Okay, so here's our timer section, aka I like to call this like the physics section. So whenever the timer ticks, I'm going to check if the up key was pressed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be messing with the player's X and Y position. Sorry, the opposite of that. His X and Y velocity, not his position. And at the end of this section, notice here what we're doing is we're adding the X direction if there is any, and the Y velocity if there is any. Okay? So when you're going up, the Y velocity is -1. So every clock tick you go up 1 pixel up. And you don't do anything if the up key has been pressed. You don't do anything in the X direction. We also set the direction for up. We're going to use that in collision later on. Okay? So we just do the same thing with key down, key left, key right. And as I mentioned, we move the player based on his velocity. Okay, he should only be going, only one of these is going to do something at a time, because each of these keys sets one of the things to 0. Okay, here is where we're drawing a line behind the bike, or player, whatever you want to call it. So we take the X position and we divide it by 10. That's because there's 50 rows and columns. But because my screen size, where's my screen size set up here in constants? No, I guess I didn't do that. I should have done that as a constant. Here we go. Yeah, my screen size is 500 by 500, so just like Pac-Man, if there's 50 rows and the screen is 500 pixels wide, when you cut that up, you're going to have each column's going to be 10 pixels across and each row is going to be 10 pixels across. Okay? So what we're doing here is we're just setting that to a 2, and you'll see in the render section that's a different color. I think it's like blue or something. Here's collision. If you notice, I don't actually have a collision function going on here. Like there's nothing after my render section, after the game loop dies, there's nothing down there. I'm not actually doing a function. I'm just checking it right here in the code. I'm just saying like, hey, if we're going right and the player's position to his right, that's why I'm adding 10 here, and I'm not adding 10 here because this would be checking down. If it's not 0, that means we've crashed into something. We've crashed into a wall, we've crashed into our tail that we leave behind, or the other player's tail. So at the moment, I just say crash. You might want to, well, you don't might want to, you definitely want to change this so it does something other than just say crash. You probably want to have a sound effect. You want to reduce the player's lives. Maybe you want to reset their position. Maybe you want to wipe the board. But you definitely need to do a bunch of stuff here besides just say crash. That is your job to finish that. It should not be hard. Okay. Nothing new here. You've seen this since pre-Pong days. Close the Allegro window if the X is pressed. Check what key is pressed down. Check if any key is let go of. Render section, wipe the screen black. Here we go. Here's where we're messing with the matrix. So we walk through the matrix with a double loop again. If it's 1, remember that was my wall color, I'm going to shade in. I'm shading in everything white. You can see the white color right here. And if it's a 2, that was the tail of my player 1, he's going to get like that blue color. Okay? Remember, if you guys change your grid size, like instead of 500 by 500 with 50 rows and 50 columns, these numbers might here change. The reason why I'm multiplying by 10 is the fact that if I have a 500 by 500 screen and I slice it into 50 rows and 50 columns, each grid is going to be a 10 by 10 square inside of it. Okay? And remember how draw filled rectangle works? This is my top left corner. This is my bottom right corner. So they have the same, I times 10, I times 10, but the bottom one has a plus 10 to show that I'm going to go over 10 and then down 10. Okay? Then you have to draw the player. You might want to replace this with a bitmap, like an actual picture eventually. I'm not going to be too picky about that. Yeah, and then here's the end of your game loop, and then you just clear up your memory. So get this coded up, and you should have something that looks kind of like this. Sorry, my computer's a little slow. And so what you need to do, number 1, is you need to make this collision actually do something besides just say crash over there. Okay, notice it also says crash if I go through the wall. Okay, so probably like stop the game, reset positions. If you want to wipe the screen, like set everything up to zeros again, that's cool. And then the other thing you need to do is you need to add a player 2 that's drawing a different color line behind him that also has collision working for him. Okay? Good luck!